Perhaps you've seen on television the ad for one of the cell companies where gentleman runs around in the middle of a swamp or in the middle of a desert, and can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And I think today, as we listen to this first reading, God's saying to us, can you hear me now? Have I made my message clear enough to you? That was the question that Isaiah posed to the people then. Because over and over again, God had sent prophets among them to remind them of his love for them. You know, in our society, we get the word prophet, and we think of somebody that's going to tell us about the future. But that's not the function of the prophets. The prophets are there to remind us of what's already been given to us. We have this great gift of the love of God in our lives, and most of us are oblivious. God's there, or he's up there someplace, instead of being right here among us. And so this preoccupation with God then is manifest in what Paul writes to us. And before I talk about what Paul speaks to us today, let me talk to you about Paul. You need to remember that Paul was a good Jew. He was a Roman citizen, but he was a good Jew. He persecuted the Christian church as being idolaters until he had his experience of Jesus Christ. Now, you can't completely separate Paul from his Jewishness, just like you can't separate Jesus from his Jewishness as well. For you see, for males in Judaism, it is very important to study Torah, to devote yourself totally to the study of Torah, to look at God's Word. And that's the environment that Paul, being a wealthy Jew to boot, was able to devote his life to the study of the law. And so he says to us today that it is far better not to get married, because then you can't study Torah, because you can't devote yourself to God the way you should. So that's where you see this contrast coming up between unmarried men and married men, because the married man has to be concerned with all these other things. Advance 2,000 years. Well, households are different today. So what's the message to us? Are we all supposed to remain single and celibate in order to study the Scriptures? We all know what happened to the Shakers, where unless somebody was coming in, they didn't get married and have children. They died off as a faith community. But we're commanded by God to live in a society in which we fill the world with life and love. And so we have to have our priorities straight. Yes, we have to be concerned about where the house payment's coming from, where food's going to be on the table. But no one says that we have to live in a 10,000 square foot home for two people. No one says that you have to have lobster and steak on your plate every night. No one says you have to drive these gas guzzlers. No one says that you have to keep up with the Joneses. Getting our priorities straight involves understanding who God is in our lives first. After we have our relationship with God, that's when we start building our relationships with a spouse, with family, with friends, with the community. But God remains first in our efforts, in our thoughts. We make time for God, just like we make time for a spouse and children and friends and work. But you keep it in priority. And folks, if you want to know where the church is, it's way down the list. You and God, your family, what you need to do to support your family, your friends, your community, the church. So while we're part of your lives, this is not supposed to be the end-all of all end-alls for you. It's your relationship with God that is supposed to be there. That God, who we hear, is a God of love. Now, you know I'm beating a dead horse here when I start talking about love, because you hear it almost every week. But it is that love of God, that when we focus on his love for us, that we understand how loved we are, we're able to love others. That we're able to reach beyond ourselves to care for the other. And so today, as we hear about a prophet not being accepted in his own town, we understand that Jesus is not accepted in many places of worship, that his message is so radical that people put blinders on and only hear what they want to hear. But he calls for us to be radical in our belief and the practice of our faith, to love our God first and our neighbors as ourselves, and to go out and to spread that word through the community so that others can come to the knowledge of the love of God that Isaiah talked about in the first reading. Do you hear me now?